It was the second Tuesday of October, in the year of our Lord, 1818, the 13th of the month, and at 20 minutes past 9 in the cold, pale blue morning, the London mail coach for Folkestone, full to the box and a quarter of an hour late, came down the long chalk road into the village of Stilling by the Down in Kent. The coach was awaited at the Lich Gate of St. Matthew's Parish Church, as every Tuesday, by Mr. Eldridge, the postmaster, 58, thinning sandy grey hair, pale blue eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, 5'8" thin, in black wool coat and dark grey waistcoat, by Mr. Jeremiah Trundle, farmer of Down Farm, 67, silver grey hair beneath a tall brown felt hat, weathered skin, sturdy 5'9" in dark brown country coat and brown-topped boots, and by Mrs. Susan Trundle, his wife, 64, soft grey hair beneath a dark grey bonnet, hazel eyes, plump 5'2" in dark grey wool gown and cloak, who had brought 3 brown eggs to send up to her sister at Ashford. The coach drew up. The off-horse blew once into the cold. The guard came down from the box in his red coat and brass buttons and let down the iron step. A single passenger descended. She was a young woman in plain dark charcoal travelling grey, a dark grey silk bonnet and black kid gloves. She carried a small carpet bag in her right hand and a leather portfolio under her left arm. She inclined her head courteously to the guard, who knuckled his hat. She stood for a small, composed instant upon the cold chalk pavement, looking up at the Lich Gate and the low square Norman tower of the church beyond. She did not look like a woman come to a village by mistake. The 3 watchers looked at her. She looked, in steady quiet, back at them. Mrs. Trundle drew a small breath and folded her hands over her cloak. Mr. Trundle pushed his hat a little back. Mr. Eldridge took one careful step forward and lifted his hat with the small fixed civility of a country postmaster who has had 33 years' practice in meeting strangers from the London road. "Madam," he said, "may I be of any small service?" The young woman inclined her head a second time, with the same composed quiet. "I thank you, sir. I am Miss Diana Lockyer, come on this morning's mail from London to Hallam Cottage. The late Mrs. Anne Goodyear was my mother's sister. I have the keeping of the cottage from this day. I have a letter from her solicitor in my portfolio, should it be required." She spoke in a soft, warm, low alto voice that lay level upon the cold air. Long, rich, dark, honey-blonde, wavy hair, deep, warm honey-blonde with ash-gold lights where the bonnet did not cover it, lay pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with small wisps escaped at the temples. Her eyes were clear, soft, slate grey, the cool slate grey of a Kent winter sky, with thick, dark lashes and a steady, direct gaze. Her skin was ivory fair, with a faint, warm rose flush across the cheekbones, faint freckles across the bridge of the nose, and a small natural beauty mark below the right corner of the lower lip. Her face was oval and composed, her mouth soft and well-shaped, her brows finely arched, dark honey brown, her neck long and graceful. She was slender, 5'5", and stood upright. "No letter is required, Miss Lockyer," said Mr. Eldridge, with a small civil bow. "Mrs. Eldridge has aired the cottage this fortnight, by Mr. Penhallow's instruction. If you will permit me, I will carry your carpet-bag." She permitted him. They turned from the Lich Gate. Mrs. Trundle, watching them go, said quietly, "Poor lamb, and only the one bag." Mr. Trundle said, "She walks straight, mother. She'll do." The long lane to Hallam Cottage ran south between flint walls and the bare lime trees, past the parish school where small voices were at their catechism, and past the green where the parish pond lay pale grey. The rooks went up in slow black handfuls at their passing. The cottage stood at the south end of the village, behind a low whitewashed wall, a small 2-up 2-down, with a slate roof gone soft grey, and a green-painted door beneath a porch of new ivy. The front garden held 4 bushes of late roses gone over. Behind lay the kitchen garden, cabbages blue-green, leeks straight, parsley still in bloom. Mr. Eldridge unlocked the green door, set the carpet-bag upon the worn turkey rug of the parlour, and stood respectfully in the doorway. The fire was laid. The aunt's books, a Bible, a prayer book, 2 volumes of Cowper, a Goldsmith, a Mrs. Barbauld, the 11-bound volumes of the Lady's Pocket Magazine, stood upon the chimney-piece wall. A round deal table with a white linen cloth stood by the leaded window, a writing desk beneath the window with a fresh tallow candle in a pewter stick. "I thank you very much, Mr. Eldridge." "It is no trouble, ma'am. The pump runs sweet. The coal bin is full. Mrs. Eldridge will look in tomorrow with the parish loaf and a jug of milk. Good morning." He bowed and went away, and Diana shut the green door and stood for a small, composed instant in the centre of her own parlour, with the portfolio still under her left arm. She did not weep. She took off her bonnet and gloves and pelisse, and hung the pelisse upon the peg behind the door. She set the portfolio upon the writing desk, drew out the sheaf of pattern cards from Madame Lefebvre and the folded parchment of the deed from Mr. Penhallow, and laid them upon the desk. She lit the fire from a paper spill, set the kettle upon the crane, and unpacked her carpet-bag. 3 plain morning gowns, 2 pairs of wool stockings, a lavender water bottle, the ebony comb that had been her mother's, a black silk reticule with £8 11s. That was all the money she had in the world. She made tea and drank it standing at the window. Then she went out by the kitchen door into the kitchen garden and walked the flagged path between the cabbages and the leeks. She did not weep there either. She had been alone before. She thought as she walked of her father, Sir Roger Lockyer, Baronet, dead 5 years of pleurisy after his last meeting with the bankers at Lewes, a tall, slight man with grave grey eyes who had not, until the autumn of 1812, said a word to her of money. The estate had gone in a rope-walk speculation. The entail had carried what was left to a third cousin who had not offered her a roof. Madame Lefebvre, who had made her mother's wedding gown 20 years before, had offered her one. She thought of the 4 years upon Bond Street, the bedchamber above the showroom, the high north light upon the cutting table, the patient learning of the trade. She had been very tired, and had been spoken to as an assistant by ladies who would have asked her in to dinner had they known her father. She had not let either touch her. She thought of her aunt, a tall, thin woman with kind, tired hazel eyes, who had read aloud from Cowper at this same window, one wet April afternoon when Diana was 14, and who had died quietly in her sleep on the last Saturday of September, and had left her the cottage and £60 a year. It was not much. It was, she knew, exactly enough. She went back inside as the cold began to bite, sat down at the writing desk, and laid her hand flat upon the parchment of the deed. A fact, not a hope. She did not, at supper of bread and cheese, write to any London acquaintance. There were 3 or 4 ladies in town who would have been civil. She did not write. She read a little of Cowper, watched the fire down to the embers, and went up with the candle to sleep, for the first time in 4 years, in a bed that was her own. On the morning of Wednesday, the 14th of October, at 10:30, there came a steady, firm, civil rap upon the green-painted door. Diana opened it. The lady upon the porch was 55, 5'5", and upright. Soft, mid-brown hair, shot with grey, was pinned smooth beneath a small white linen housekeeper's cap. Her eyes were clear, kind hazel, her skin fair with the indoor pallor of a great house upper servant, her mouth soft and well-shaped. She wore a plain, dark bombazine gown with white linen apron and chatelaine of keys at the waist. Over it, against the cold, a dark grey wool cloak. In her hand, a small black-bound ledger. "Miss Lockyer, I am Mrs. Aldridge, housekeeper at Westmere Park. I knew your aunt very well, and have come to pay my respects to her niece, with His Grace's knowledge, and Lady Iris Norwood's compliments. May I trouble you a quarter of an hour?" The voice was a steady, warm Kent voice, low and grave and very kind. "Mrs. Aldrich, you are very welcome indeed. Will you come in?" Diana drew her into the parlour, set her in the wing chair by the fire, and went to set the kettle upon the crane. Mrs. Aldrich laid the ledger upon her knee, and looked once about the room, at the shelf of cowper, at the round table, at the portfolio upon the writing desk, and her eyes warmed. She kept it just so. "I am very glad it has come to you, ma'am. There were a great many in the village who feared it might be sold up by the heir at law and let to strangers. We are all glad it is not." "Was she much loved here?" "Very much loved. She read every Wednesday to the 3 old women in the cottages by the green these 11 years. She kept the parish coal list with the vicar, the list of those entitled to 100 weight a week from the wood yard through November to March. She had been upon it these 9 winters past, not from need, but as a courtesy from His Grace, who has stood the cost of the list since the year 5. I have brought it. I supposed you would wish to remain." She opened the ledger upon her knee. Diana came to the fire with the teapot and the small jug of yesterday's milk, and sat down opposite. "I would be very grateful, Mrs. Aldrich. The parish coal would be of real assistance through the winter, if it may be had without offence to those who have greater need." "It may. There are 41 cottages upon the list, and we have provision for 48. His Grace is particular upon the point. Sign here, ma'am, and the date." Diana signed. Her hand was very steady. "His Grace," she said quietly, pouring the tea. "Is that the Duke of Westmere?" "It is. Lord Geoffrey Norwood, 4th of the title, succeeded in May of 14. I have been at Westmere 26 years. His Grace is a quiet, steady gentleman, and not a proud man. He has had 2 heavy years. The Duchess, the Lady Aurora that was, died in childbed in October of 16, the boy with her, and he has only the one child living, Lady Felicity, 6 this Michaelmas past." "6," said Diana gently. "A quiet child. She lost her mother before she could remember her face. Her father is by her every evening at 6 without fail, and reads to her his half-hour, and has done these 2 years. She has not suffered as she might have done in another house. But the want is there, ma'am. There is no mistaking it." They spoke a little longer, of the parish school, of Mrs. Cardew the cook, of Reverend Easton, who would no doubt call within the week. At 11:15, Mrs. Aldrich rose and gave Diana her hand at the porch. "You are very welcome to the parish, Miss Lockyer. We shall hope to see you often." "I thank you, Mrs. Aldrich, with all my heart." She watched the dark grey cloak go up the lane between the lime trees, and did not turn back into the parlour until it had passed the bend. On the afternoon of Thursday, the 15th of October, at 3 o'clock precisely, the vicar of St. Matthew's came down the lane upon foot. He was 56, 5'10", thin with a scholar's stoop. Soft, sandy grey hair, thinned finely at the crown. Clear, honest hazel eyes looked steadily out from behind small, gold-rimmed spectacles. His skin was fair and gently weathered, his face long and kind and clean-shaven. He wore his black cassock, white linen surplice over his arm, white collar band freshly starched, small silver crucifix on its black silk cord. Over it, a heavy black wool cloak. "Miss Lockyer, I am Reverend Easton, vicar of this parish. May I be permitted a quarter of an hour at your fire?" "Reverend, you are very welcome. Pray come in." She set him in the wing chair Mrs. Aldrich had had the day before. He laid the surplice upon the table, accepted the cup of tea she poured for him, and looked at her steadily across the hearth. "I will not stay long. I am come to bid you welcome to the parish, and to assure you of any small service it may be in my power to do for you. Your late aunt was very dear to us. I buried her 3 Sundays gone. She had the steady kind of goodness one does not advertise. "I thank you, sir. She was kind to me as a child." "She was kind to a great many. I am come to ask a small thing, and pray feel no obligation to answer this afternoon. Your aunt was the parish reader to the elderly poor every Wednesday from 2 until 4, these 11 years. Pilgrim's Progress through the winter, the Gospels through the spring. The post carries a stipend of £8 a year, paid quarterly. It is yours, if you would take it up, and if you would not, we will think no less of you." Diana set down her cup. "Reverend Easton, I should be very glad to consider it. I am newly come, as you see, and have not yet quite settled my own affairs. May I give my answer in a fortnight, by the last of October?" "By the last of October, ma'am, with my thanks." He spoke a little of the 3 elderly poor, the old shepherd's widow, the old laundress, the blind former parish clerk. Diana listened, and once or twice asked a small question. At 4:15 he rose, took up his surplice, bowed, and went away up the lane. Diana stood at her window and watched him go, and felt that the village had quite gently opened to her, not as a curiosity, but as her aunt's niece, which was a different and better thing. On Friday the 16th of October, at 11:30, she set out for the village shop with her small basket upon her arm and her bonnet tied beneath her chin. She wanted tea, sugar, candles, and a small loaf. She did not know that the cold, pale blue morning had any other appointment in it for her. The village shop stood at the north end of the green opposite the small forge, a low-roofed, brick-and-flint building with a black-painted door and a brass bell above. Inside it smelt of tea and brown paper and tallow. Mrs. Penrith was behind the counter. An old woman paid out coppers for needles at the further end. A black and white cat lay asleep upon a sack of barley by the door. Diana asked for tea, sugar, candles, and a small loaf. Mrs. Penrith set out a quarter of Bahia, 6 tallow candles, and a small loaf of yesterday's white. Diana laid down her coins and waited for the change. The brass bell rang. A gentleman came in. He stood a small civil instant upon the mat and removed his hat with his right hand. He was tall, 6'2", lean and broad-shouldered. His hair was thick, dark walnut brown, deep, warm walnut with bronze lights where the cold window light touched it, cut close at the nape, with one premature streak of pure silver above the left temple and one lock fallen across his brow. His eyes were clear, cool, storm-grey blue, the slate-grey blue of the Kentish Channel under cloud, with flecks of dark gold. His skin was fair and faintly weathered from country riding. There was a small, thin, pale scar at the right temple. His face was strong and angular, his mouth firm and grave, with a small dark mole at the left corner of the lower lip. He wore a dark walnut-brown country morning coat, buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped boots, and a fresh white cravat. Upon his right hand was the Westmere ducal signet, heavy silver, a stag's head over a sheaf of corn. Diana, at the counter, did not at first turn. She heard the door close, heard the steady tread of riding boots, and went on counting her change. Mrs. Penrith dropped a curtsy. "Your Grace." "Good morning, sir." "Good morning, Mrs. Penrith. I came down only for the small parcel from Mr. Penhallow. Pray do not hurry." The voice was a deep, clear, quiet baritone. Diana finished counting her change, settled her basket upon her arm, and turned for the door. She saw him then. He had been waiting at the door's edge, and had taken one careful pace aside to leave her the passage. He said, in his quiet baritone, "Only her name. Miss Lockyer." She stopped. She looked once into the clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes, the same 6.5 years ago eyes, and recognition arrived. Her hand upon the basket handle did not tremble. "Your Grace." She knew from the coat and the signet that he had come into the title since their 2 dances at his uncle Lord Hartwell's country ball in August 1812, when she had been 17 and he the Marquess of Hartwell. She did not yet know which title. He read the unfixed quality of her address and answered it at once. "I am Geoffrey Norwood, 4th Duke of Westmere. I was Hartwell at my uncle's ball, ma'am. My father died in May of 14, and I succeeded. Then I am very sorry, Your Grace, for your loss." "I thank you. I was very sorry, ma'am, to hear of your father's death. I had not known of it at the time." "You are very kind." A small, steady pause. Mrs. Penreath stepped discreetly to the far end of the counter with a duster. "I am told by Mrs. Aldridge, ma'am, that you are come to Hallam Cottage as Mrs. Goodyear's niece. Mrs. Goodyear was a great friend to my daughter, who has had her small books from her these 2 Christmases. We are sorry to have lost her." "I thank you, Your Grace. I should have liked to have seen her again. You are with us, I hope, for some time?" "I am, sir. The cottage is mine." "Then will you permit me to call at Hallam Cottage, when convenient, and with Mrs. Aldridge as my companion at the door, to renew the acquaintance?" She inclined her head with the same composed quiet she had given Mr. Eldridge upon the chalk pavement on Tuesday. "You may, Your Grace, with my thanks." "I am obliged to you, ma'am. Good morning." He bowed. She inclined a second time. He stepped back the civil pace, and she went past him, and the brass bell rang once as she opened the door, and once again as it closed behind her upon the cold, pale blue morning. She walked the long lane home with her basket upon her arm. She did not weep. She did not, at supper alone, write to any London acquaintance. She washed her cup, banked the fire, and sat at the writing desk with the cold blue October dusk coming down over the late roses. She thought of August 1812. She had been 17. Lord Hartwell had been a quiet young gentleman of 27, lately down from Oxford. They had danced twice, a country dance and a quadrille, and he had asked her what she meant to read that winter. She had said, "The Mysteries of Udolpho," because her governess would not let her. And he had laughed once and said he would not tell. He had brought her lemonade, handed her to her father at the close of the second dance, and gone away. She had thought him the gravest kind young man she had ever met. He had not been Hartwell these 4 years. He had been Westmere, had had a wife and lost her, a son and lost him, a small daughter motherless, and 2 heavy years of mourning at the great house 3 miles up the chalk. She did not yet know how to think him now. She thought him only this, that he had stepped aside at the door's edge and waited in steady silence until she had finished counting her change, and that he had not, in the calling of her name, made her feel for one instant a kindness offered downward, but only the civility a gentleman gives to a lady he remembers. She read a little of Cowper and went up to bed. She walked home from the village shop with her basket. The hedges were bare, and the rooks were calling from the elms above the parsonage paddock. She did not weep. She had not wept in the shop, and she did not weep on the lane, and she did not, she told herself with the small, steady mildness she had practised through 6 years in London, intend to weep at all. She thought of the August country ball at Lord Hartwell's house in 1812. She had been 17, her father alive, the Lockyer rents paid, and of the tall, grave young man who had bowed twice to her and spoken of Cowper and of Kent at the second figure of the second set. He had been 28 then. He was 34 now. There was one streak of pure silver above his left temple that had not been there in 1812, a small, thin, pale scar at the right temple, and a quiet at the firm, grave mouth that had not been there either. She had heard, in the shop, the word widower. She had heard it without flinching. She laid the basket on the kitchen table. She untied her bonnet. She took her small commonplace book from the parlour shelf, dipped the pen, and wrote one line beneath the date. Friday, 16th October, 1818. At Mr. Pike's shop, the Duke of Westmere. He knew me. We had danced in 1812. She blotted the line. She closed the book. She set it back upon the shelf. He called the following afternoon at 3. Mrs. Aldridge came with him as the proper companion and seated herself with her sewing in the high-backed chair by the parlour door. Diana received them in the small front parlour at Hallam Cottage, low-beamed, lime-washed, the leaded window casting pale October sun upon the worn turkey rug, a small coal fire in the grate, 2 cane chairs, a writing desk in the window, the shelves of Mrs. Goodyear's books along the inner wall. Geoffrey took the offered chair and set his hat upon his knee. "Miss Lockyer, it is good of you to receive me. Your Grace, it is good of you to come. I shall be brief, and I shall not press. I came chiefly to inquire how you do. The village has been very kind. Mr. Eldridge, Mrs. Trundle, the Reverend Easton, Mrs. Aldridge with the parish coal record. I have not been left to feel a stranger. Mrs. Goodyear was loved here. The parish has not forgotten her. No, Your Grace, I think it has not." He turned his hat once. "I had not known, until yesterday at the shop, that you were her niece. I had not known, in truth, of Sir Roger's death. I had been in the north on the regiment when the news of 13 came through. I had not afterwards kept up the connection as I ought. Your Grace was not obliged. I had danced twice with his daughter at Lord Hartwell's. I had been obliged. I am sorry for your father. He was a gentleman of the kind one does not, in a long lifetime, often meet." "Thank you, Your Grace. I shall remember that you said it." The coal settled in the grate. "And the 6 years between," he said, "if I may ask." "I was in London. At my father's death I had a small jointure of my mother's, £80 a year, which sufficed for board but not a settled household. In 14 I went into apprenticeship at Madame Lefebvre's in Bond Street, a French milliner who had been kind to my mother. 4 years apprentice, 2 assistant. She retired in September and the establishment closed. My aunt's death reached me the same week. I came down on Tuesday's mail. You were 6 years in trade. I had 6 years in a regiment of light cavalry. Trade and a regiment are nearer kin than the drawing-rooms of London allow." A small lift at the corner of her composed mouth. "You are kind to say so. I am exact to say so. May I ask, at Lord Hartwell's, the second dance, the Boulanger, we spoke of Cowper at the figure. I remember. The task book the 4th, the winter evening, the lighted candles, the sofa by the fire. You quoted 4 lines. I have not forgotten them." She looked at him then, steady. "I had not supposed your Grace would remember. I had not supposed I should be sitting in your aunt's parlour 6 years and 2 months on." He went on, easy. "I have a daughter, Felicity. She is 6½ Her mother has been gone 2 years this October. My sister Lady Iris is with us. The child is well loved and she is bright. She dines at the family table. She will be a torment in society in 10 years if she is not checked, which I do not intend to check. If you would consent to it, I should like you to dine with us at Westmere on Wednesday next at 6. My sister joins me in the asking. The carriage shall be sent. Your Grace, I shall be very glad, but I shall walk. I am used to walking." "As you wish." "The lantern shall be at the Chalk Lane gate from 5:45. You are very good." "I am exact." He rose. "I shall not keep you." Mrs. Aldridge folded her sewing, inclined to Diana with a warmth that was on the road to becoming a smile, and went out. He bowed at the parlour door, and the gate clicked behind them at 3:30 exactly. She walked the half-mile to St. Matthew's on Sunday morning at 11:15. The bell rang one low steady note. The chalk path through the churchyard was edged with frost. She carried her late mother's small prayer book. The Reverend Easton met her at the south porch and showed her to the front pew of the south side that had been her aunt's these 20 years. The village looked at the back of her neat low chignon and decided, Mrs. Trundle would say so on the porch in 15 minutes, that Mrs. Goodyear's niece was settled looking, which in the dialect of Stilling by the Down was as high a word as could be put upon a woman after one Sunday's hearing. The Reverend Easton preached steadily on the gospel, the labourers in the vineyard, the 11th hour, the equal penny. He neither raised his voice nor lowered it. Mrs. Trundle was upon her at the porch step. Miss Lockyer, I would be a poor neighbour if I did not say it. You are very welcome among us. The cottage is dry. The cottage is dry. The chimney drew at the first lighting. I am much obliged. Then that is settled. You will come up to Down Farm one Wednesday for your tea. I shall send Trundle with the day. I shall be glad. Another small nod, and Mrs. Trundle moved off, and Diana walked home down the chalk with the bell of St. Matthew's tolling once behind her for the noon. On the Tuesday afternoon she sat at the small writing desk in the parlour window, dipped the pen, and wrote in her clear small hand, Hallam Cottage, Stilling by the Down, Kent, Tuesday, October 20th, 1818. My dear Madame, you will forgive the delay of 1 week. I am settled. The cottage is small and clean and dry. The parish is kind. The Reverend Easton has called. Mrs. Trundle has spoken to me on the church porch, and Mrs. Aldridge from Westmere Park has been twice with the parish coal record. The annuity is paid quarterly through Mr. Pike at the shop. I have not yet needed to draw upon the small reserve you so kindly settled upon me, for which again I thank you. I beg you will give my regards to Mademoiselle Hortense and to Madame Verrier, and send me word of yourself when you are settled at Tunbridge Wells. Your obliged and affectionate servant, Diana Lockyer. She blotted, folded, sealed with a small wafer, and set the letter upon the hall table for the morning's post. She did not write, on that afternoon or upon any afternoon, to her cousin Sir Hugh Lockyer of Lockyer Park, who had had her father's estate by the entail and had not, in the 5 years and 7 months since, sent her one line. On the Wednesday at 20 minutes past 5, she set out down the chalk in the cold blue October dusk for the 3-mile walk to Westmere Park. She wore her one good evening gown of plain soft dove-grey silk with a white lace fichu, her late mother's small pearl-drop earrings, the long honey-blonde hair pinned smooth in the low chignon. In the reed basket on her arm, her ivory silk slippers, to be exchanged for her walking slippers at the rectory steps. Lady Iris's carriage had been offered and declined. The lane went up between bare hedges and dim ploughed fields. A blackbird called once at the crossroads. The boy from Westmere came down with a lantern at the rectory turn at 5:15. She exchanged her slippers on the stone bench, and he walked the lantern beside her up the long elm avenue. The front court opened at 5:45. A long, low, E-shaped carillon of warm, pale honey stone, 2 lamps at the door, the windows of the south wing warm yellow. The great door opened upon Mr. Tibbins, butler at Westmere these 26 years, 62, thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined, fair pale indoor skin, long kind face clean-shaven, tall 6 foot thin upright, in plain black butler's tailcoat, white cravat, black silk waistcoat with small gilt buttons, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes. He inclined with the steady, warm welcome of a man who had been at Lord Hartwell's house in the August of 1812 in his master's train, and who had, though Diana did not know it, written in the steward's day-book that the young lady at Hallam Cottage was to be received with every courtesy. Miss Lockyer. You are very welcome. Her ladyship is in the drawing-room. His Grace is at his letters and will be down in 10 minutes. Lady Felicity is upon the stairs and will not be detained more than 5. May I take your cloak? Mr. Tibbins. Thank you. He took the cloak and the basket, preceded her across the wide stone-flagged hall to the drawing-room door, and announced her in his steady, deep voice, Miss Lockyer, my lady, and stood aside. The drawing-room was warm, low lit by candles in silver branches upon the chimney-piece, a coal fire steady in the grate, the pale yellow silk walls warm, 2 cream silk sofas at right angles to the fire. Lady Iris Norwood rose from the right-hand sofa, 54, soft, silver-grey hair pinned beneath a small white lace cap, clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes, the very twin of her brother's, fair, lightly lined skin, kind, firm mouth, slender 5'7" upright. She wore a plain, high-waisted, soft lavender silk gown with a white lace fichu, a small black jet brooch at the throat, plain pearl drop earrings. Miss Lockyer, come to the fire. The chalk is cold at this hour. Tibbins, the small Madeira, if you please. Sit. Geoffrey will be 10 minutes. Penhallow has sent down a letter that wants reading twice. Lady Iris, you are very good. I am exact, child. My brother says it of himself, and it is family failing. I knew your aunt. 15 years on the parish coal committee, and there was not a winter she did not find me one widow more than I had counted. She spoke of you. She had a small miniature of you on her parlour shelf, taken when you were 10, which I shall show you after dinner. You are not, in this house, a stranger on any side. Lady Iris, I am very glad to know that she spoke of me. She loved you. She had not the means to send for you, and she would not be a charge upon you, and she settled the cottage upon you in the will of last June. That is said. Now, the second matter. My niece. Felicity is 6½. Her mother, Aurora, died in October 16 in childbed of the second child, a boy lost with her. The child was 2 years and 8 months old. She does not remember her mother in any clear feature. She remembers a voice singing the Bedfordshire lullaby, a hand at the bath, the smell of orris root. She has been raised by Nurse Wenwood, by me, and by her father, who is her whole heart and to whom she is his. When she climbs upon you, and she will, child, she climbs upon any lady who reads steadily and does not affect, you shall know what you are receiving. Lady Iris, thank you for the telling. It was owed you. Ah, the Madeira. Mr. Tibbins set the small silver tray upon the work table. Lady Iris poured 2 glasses with a steady, firm hand, and Diana, in her dove-grey silk, knew that she had been received. The dinner bell rang at 6:30. Geoffrey came down at the second stroke, inclined at the drawing-room door. Forgive me, Penhallow's hand is the worst in the 4 kingdoms, and gave his arm to his sister. Lady Iris gave her hand to Diana, and the 3 crossed to the small family dining parlour, where the 4th place was at her father's left hand. Lady Felicity Norwood was already in her chair, 6 years and a half old, soft, dark walnut brown, wavy hair, pinned in 2 short plaits with white ribbon, clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes, the very twin of her father's, fair, lightly freckled skin, slender 3'10", in a plain pale blue wool schoolgirl's frock with a white pinafore. She had been told to sit very still, and was sitting very still, watching Diana with the composed gravity of a small Norwood at her first introduction. Mrs. Cardew's soup came up, a clear brown country soup of beef and root, plain, hot, well salted, the work of a plump, pink-cheeked hand in dark blue print cotton and a large white linen apron below stairs. Lady Felicity, said Diana after the grace, good evening. The plaits inclined a 1/4 inch. Good evening, Miss Lockyer. That is a very fine pinafore. Aunt Iris made the hem. It is very even. A small, pleased silence. The plaits inclined another 1/4 inch. By the second course, a plain roast partridge with bread sauce, Felicity had ventured. Miss Lockyer, have you been to London? I have, Lady Felicity. I lived there 4 years. Are there post-coaches? Many. The Brighton, the Dover, the Folkestone, the Hastings. They go from the Bull and Mouth in the City, and from the White Horse in Piccadilly. And, Miss Lockyer, if you had a pony, would you have a chestnut or a grey?" "I have not a pony, Lady Felicity." The Platts went quite still. The cool storm grey-blue eyes went very wide. "Not at all?" "Not at all." "Papa," said Felicity, turning, scandalised, to her father at the head of the table, "Miss Lockyer has not a pony." "So I hear," said Geoffrey, steady, the firm grave mouth quite straight, the cool storm grey-blue eyes resting once upon Diana across the candles and away. "The matter shall be considered, Felicity, at a quieter hour. It must be considered, Papa. It shall be." Lady Iris, at her brother's right, lifted her glass a small quarter-inch and lowered it, and said nothing at all. The talk by the third course had run on into the parish, into Mrs. Trundle's hens, and the small Norwood at her father's left had ventured to laugh, clear and sudden and immediately mortified at herself, and then at Lady Iris's steady warm look, recovered and laughed again. "Forgive her," said Geoffrey mild. "She has not laughed at her dinner this 12-month, Miss Lockyer. We had supposed she had given over the practice." "I shall laugh whenever I please, Papa." "I rely upon it." Coffee was served in the South Library at 8:30. A long warm room, firelight steady on dark oak shelves, 2 deep crimson armchairs at the hearth, a cream silk sofa between, the faint, clean smell of beeswax and old leather. Felicity came in with her father at her hand and made at once for the picture book on the sofa cushion. Cowper's poems with 12 hand-coloured plates, done by Lady Iris herself, the winter of 15. "Miss Lockyer, will you read it me?" "Felicity," said Geoffrey, quiet. "We ask." "Please, Miss Lockyer, will you read it me?" "Lady Felicity, with great pleasure." Diana sat upon the cream silk sofa. Felicity, with the steady purpose of a small Norwood who had laid her plan, climbed upon the cushion beside her, considered, climbed again, and was, by the third climb, settled upon Diana's lap, with the picture book open across her knees and her cheek a quarter-inch from the dove-grey silk at Diana's shoulder. Diana looked once at Geoffrey across the rug. Geoffrey, in his crimson armchair, inclined his head a quarter-inch, the cool storm grey-blue eyes steady, the firm grave mouth lifting once at the corner and lowering again, and said nothing. Diana read in the soft, warm, low alto, slow, plain, unaffected, 4 lines of Cowper to each plate, the winter evening, the lighted candles, the sofa by the fire. The same 4 lines that she had quoted to him at Lord Hartwell's house in August 1812, and which she did not, on this evening, name. By the 5th plate, Felicity's cheek had come quite to rest against the dove-grey silk. By the 7th, her small left hand had folded into Diana's right. By the 9th, she was sleepy. By the 11th, she was asleep. Lady Iris, at the chimney-piece with her small embroidery frame, looked once across the rug, and looked once again, and said nothing. Geoffrey, in the crimson armchair, did not move. The coals settled in the grate. The long case clock in the corner struck the quarter before 9. Nurse Wenwood appeared at the library door. 5:40, soft, mid-brown hair, beneath plain white linen nurse's cap, clear hazel eyes, fair, gently weathered skin, kind mouth, medium 5'5", plump, in plain dark grey print cotton with large white linen apron. She inclined to her master, to her ladyship, to Diana. "Your Grace, the hour. Nurse Wenwood, yes." The nurse crossed the rug with a steady practised step. Felicity gathered, opened her eyes once, looked up at Diana, the same cool storm grey blue as her father's, and put her small lips against Diana's cheek with the grave deliberation of a Norwood paying a debt. "Good night, Miss Lockyer." "Good night, Lady Felicity." She was carried out. The door closed softly behind them. A small silence. Diana sat where she had been left. Lady Iris took up another stitch. "Miss Lockyer," said Geoffrey, quiet, "I shall walk you home." He insisted. Mrs. Aldridge accompanied them. The lantern was in his right hand. They went down the elm avenue, out at the front lodge, and down the chalk in the cold dark. The stars were sharp above the bare hedges. An owl called once from the crossroads spinney. "Miss Lockyer." "Your Grace." "I shall speak plainly. My daughter this evening climbed upon you. She has not climbed upon any lady that was not her aunt or her nurse in the 2 years since her mother's death. I had not engineered it. I had not foreseen it. I observed it. I am grateful." A small pause. The lantern swung once. "If you would consent to it, I should like to ask you to come up to Westmere twice in the week, upon Wednesday afternoons and Saturday afternoons, from 2 until 5, to read to her in the South Library, upon an honorarium of £20 a year, paid quarterly. The carriage shall be sent in each weather. The arrangement shall stand at your pleasure, and shall end at 1/4's notice from either side." A small composed silence. Diana drew a small steady breath in the cold dark and let it out. "Your Grace, I shall be very glad. I accept. You are very good. I am exact, Your Grace." A small lift at the corner of the firm grave mouth in the lantern light, and the lantern went on down the chalk. They reached the cottage gate at 10:15. He handed her the lantern. She took it. Mrs. Aldridge inclined with a warmth that was now very nearly a smile. He bowed. The two went back up the chalk by lantern light, and the small yellow flame went 1/4 of a mile and was gone past the bend. Diana stood at the gate a long minute. The cold, sharp October stars were above her. The lane was quite quiet. She had not, in her 6 years in London, been spoken to as Geoffrey had spoken to her in the South Library. She had not, in her 6 years, been climbed upon by a child of 7. She did not know, standing at the gate of Hallam Cottage at 10:15 on the cold, dark Wednesday evening of the 21st of October, 1818, what she was to do with the freedom of either. She went in. She set the lantern upon the hall table. She closed the door. On the cold, pale blue Wednesday afternoon of the 28th of October, 1818, at 20 minutes before 3, Diana set out from Hallam Cottage and walked the 3 miles up the chalk to Westmere Park. She wore her travelling pelisse over a fresh, pale grey morning gown. She carried under her left arm a small calf-bound Cowper's Task that had belonged to her aunt, with a slip of pale blue ribbon at the opening of Book the First. The chalk lane was cold and quiet. A robin sang once from the holly at the turn of the lane and was silent. At the great south door, Mr. Tibbins received her at the precise stroke of 3. He inclined his head. "Miss Lockyer, her ladyship is in the South Library. If you will be so good." "Thank you, Mr. Tibbins." He went before her down the cold flagged passage and opened the tall mahogany door. Felicity was already on the sofa, with a small, careful stack of picture books at her elbow. Lady Iris was at the fire with her embroidery hoop upon her knee. Nurse Wenwood was at the door with her sewing. Geoffrey was at his writing table in the deep recess of the south window, reading a letter. He lifted his head as Diana came in, set the letter down, rose, and inclined. "Miss Lockyer, you are very welcome. Your Grace. Lady Iris, Lady Felicity, Nurse Wenwood. Good afternoon." The greetings were quiet and small, and went round the room and settled. Diana crossed to the sofa. Felicity, who had been very still, looked up with her clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes. "Miss Lockyer, I have my books." "So I see, Lady Felicity. May I sit beside you?" "You may." The child shifted along the sofa 1/2 foot. "Aunt Iris said I was to ask you what we should read. She said I was not to choose for you." Lady Iris is very kind. What would you wish to begin with? Felicity looked down at her stack. Her small forefinger touched the top picture book and then moved past it. She lifted her face. Papa said you have brought a book of your own. I have. What is it? Diana drew out the small, calf-bound volume and laid it upon her lap. It is a long poem by a gentleman named Mr. Cowper. The poem is called The Task. The first part of it is called The Sofa. The sofa! Felicity looked at the sofa they were sitting upon. A whole poem about a sofa. At the beginning. Then it goes out of the parlour and across the garden and into the country lane and into the wood. Mr. Cowper was a quiet gentleman who loved his garden. He wrote the poem for a friend who had set him the task of writing about a sofa, in jest. He took the task in earnest. What is a task? A small piece of work one is given to do. Like my copying? Just so. Felicity considered this. Will you read it to me? I will. May I take a small liberty and say some of it in my own words, where the words are too old for a young lady of 7? Yes, please. The child put both her small hands flat upon her pinafore. Aunt Iris always does. Diana opened the book to the pale blue ribbon. She read in her soft, warm, low alto, the words coming evenly and unhurried. She read of the rude bench and the joint stool and the 3-legged chair of the old time. She read of the carved settle and the cushioned chair. She read, in her own quiet paraphrase, of the coming of the sofa. Where Cowper's lines ran into long 18th-century clauses, she set them down in plain Kent English for a 7-year-old's ear, with the small, unhurried liberty long usage permits. Felicity listened. Her small head tipped a little to the left. Miss Lockyer, what is an urn? Diana stopped at the line and considered. An urn is a tall, narrow vessel of china or brass that one boils water in upon a small fire for tea. There is one on the parlour mantel at the vicarage. Reverend Easton has it set out on Tuesday afternoons. Oh. Felicity nodded gravely. And what is the sofa? The poem's sofa, I mean. Is it the same as ours? Diana looked down at the cushion they sat upon. Very nearly. Mr. Cowper writes of a long padded couch with arms at the 2 ends and a low back. This is one. Yours is another. They are first cousins, perhaps. First cousins. Felicity took that in with a small, approving nod. And who is the author? Mr. William Cowper. A quiet gentleman. He lived in a small village in Buckinghamshire and walked in his garden every morning and was kind to his 3 tame hares. 3 hares? 3. He had named them, and he fed them lettuce from his hand. Papa walks in our garden every morning. Papa has no hares. Then we must hope your papa is content with the pheasants. At the writing table, Geoffrey did not lift his head, but a small quietness about his mouth suggested he had heard. Diana read on. Felicity asked 3 more small questions. What was a copse? What was a bohea? Why did the poet love the winter evening more than the summer evening? And Diana answered each in 3 quiet sentences. The fire ticked. The mantel clock struck the half-hour, then the quarter, then 4. At the stroke, Mrs. Cardew came up with a small tray, 3 seed cakes warm from the oven, a jug of new milk, 2 china cups. She set it down, dropped a small curtsy to Lady Iris, smiled at Felicity, and went out. Felicity ate the first cake. Then she ate the second. Then she looked at the third upon the plate. Then she looked at Diana. Then she lifted the plate in both her small hands and held it out. Miss Lockyer, the third is for you. I thank you, Lady Felicity. That is very handsome. Diana took the third cake. It was warm. It tasted of caraway and butter. Felicity watched her eat it with grave 7-year-old approval, then drank her milk in 3 even sips, then set down the cup, then said, Aunt Iris, may we read another page before Miss Lockyer goes? You may, my dear. They read another page. The light at the south window had thinned to a pale pewter. At 5:15, Mr. Tibbins came to the door. Geoffrey rose. Diana closed the book. The first reading afternoon was done. On Saturday, the 31st of October, at the same hour, Diana walked up the chalk again. Lady Iris had set aside, upon the low table, a small slim book in olive green cloth, a collection of pony stories for young ladies, lately come down from London. Felicity, who had marked Diana's coming up the gravel sweep, was already on the sofa with the book in her lap. "Miss Lockyer, Aunt Iris says this one." "Then this one it shall be." Diana sat. She opened the book to the first story, of a small grey Welsh pony named Honeycomb, who lived in a paddock above the sea. She had read scarcely 2 pages when Felicity, in a small grave silence, climbed across the cushion and settled herself plainly upon Diana's lap, her warm head against Diana's collarbone, her small forefinger upon the corner of the page to keep the place. Diana, after a small composed instant, set her left arm steady about the child's back and read on. At the writing table, Geoffrey lifted his head once. The candle had been lit against the early dusk. The flame caught upon the single streak of pure silver above his left temple, and held there a still instant before he lowered his eyes again to his page. At the stroke of 4, Mrs. Cardew came up with the tray. Felicity stayed upon Diana's lap to eat her cake. The Wednesday and Saturday readings settled into their rhythm through November. On the 4th, the 7th, the 11th, the 14th, the 18th, the 21st, the 25th, and the 28th, in the same room at the same hour, Diana came up the chalk and read aloud. Picture books from the South Library shelves, Cowper in her quiet paraphrase, the olive green pony stories, a small new volume of fairy tales from the German, a chapter at a time of Aesop in plain prose. By the 3rd Wednesday, Felicity had taken to standing at the leaded pane at 20 minutes before 3 to watch the figure in dark charcoal grey come up the gravel sweep. By the 2nd Saturday, she had taken to climbing into Diana's lap before the first page was opened. By mid-November, she asked every Sunday morning at breakfast, in her plain grave 7-year-old voice, whether Wednesday was yet, and Lady Iris each Sunday gave the same patient answer of 2 days, or 3, or 4. Lady Iris and Diana, in those same November weeks, became friends. After Felicity had been carried upstairs by Nurse Wenwood for her tea, the two ladies took quiet walks together in the South Rose Garden in the cold, pale November light, between the bare clipped box hedges and the rose bushes pruned to their black winter wands. Lady Iris spoke, in her steady, warm Kent voice, of her late sister-in-law, Lady Aurora, of Aurora's quiet courage in her last weeks, of the small son who had not lived an hour, of the 2 years of her brother's stillness since. She spoke of Mrs. Goodyear, of the 60 years Anne Goodyear had read to the parish children at the vicarage on Tuesday afternoons, of how the village had loved her. She asked Diana of her 6 years in London, of Madame Lefebvre's establishment in Bond Street, the long 10-hour days at the cutting table, the small lodging in Castle Street. Diana answered plainly and without complaint. Lady Iris listened. On the 3rd Sunday of November, Reverend Easton, calling at Hallam Cottage after morning service, settled with Diana the parish reader post. She should read to the village children at the vicarage on Tuesday afternoons between 3 and 4, on her aunt's old plan, for £8 a year from the vestry. The line was 60 years old, a reader since 1758. Diana took the post with a small composed inclination and a quiet word of thanks. Reverend Easton drank his cup of tea and went away. That evening, alone at the writing desk by the leaded window, Diana sat a long quiet minute and thought, in her composed and unhurried way, I have become, without having sought it, the village's 3rd reader of Mrs. Goodyear's line. My aunt was the 2nd, and I am, at 23, the 3rd name on the small, old vestry roll. She found herself, on that thought, very steady and not at all afraid. The village now greeted her by name. Mr. Eldridge at the post office. Good morning, Miss Lockyer. Mrs. Susan Trundle at the village shop. Good morning, my dear. Mr. Jeremiah Trundle by the Lich Gate of a Sunday. Morning, Miss Lockyer. A fine cold morning. By the close of November, the rhythm of the reading was a thing the household took for granted, and the rhythm of the walk home was a thing Lord Geoffrey Charles Norwood, 4th Duke of Westmere, had quietly altered. He had begun, on the second Wednesday of November, to walk with her down the lane. He had said it plainly on the previous Saturday, that the chalk in the late afternoon was cold, and the lane unlit at dusk, and that he should be much obliged if she would permit him to walk her down to the cottage with Mrs. Aldridge as the proper companion. Diana had inclined her head, and said she would be much obliged. Mrs. Aldridge accompanied. She walked a steady 3 paces behind, her dark bombazine housekeeper's gown taken up at the hem against the chalk dust, her chatelaine of keys silent at her waist. She kept the proper distance, and she kept her steady hazel eyes on the lane. The conversation grew a little easier each week. By the Wednesday of the 18th of November, Geoffrey and Diana could walk the first quarter mile in companionable quiet, without the quiet pressing upon them. By the Saturday of the 21st, he had spoken to her, in his deep, clear baritone, of his 3 years at Christ's College in Cambridge, and of his old college friend, the Reverend Anthony Hartwell, now a fellow there. By the Wednesday of the 25th, he had taken from the breast of his dark walnut-brown country morning coat a single folded sheet, a recent letter from Cambridge, and had read aloud from it as they walked an account of the autumn examinations, a small mild joke about the new dean, a query after his Grace's health. Diana, when he had finished and folded the letter back into his coat, drew from beneath her pelisse her small calf-bound cowper, and read aloud, in her soft, warm, low alto, the passage she had marked that afternoon. 12 lines in which Mr. Cowper, walking his own quiet country lane at dusk, sees the first lamp of the village kindled in a cottage window, and is consoled. Geoffrey, when she had finished, walked a small, steady distance in quiet, and then said, I had not heard those lines. I thank you. At the gate of Hallam Cottage at 5:30 he inclined. She inclined. Mrs. Aldridge, at her steady 3 paces, inclined. The 2 figures in dark walnut brown and dark bombazine turned and walked the 3 miles back up the chalk together in the cold, pale blue dusk, and Diana watched them go from her parlour window with a small, composed, unhurried warmth at her breastbone. On Friday the 25th of December, Christmas Day, at the 3:15 in the warm, pale yellow afternoon, Diana was received at the great south door of Westmere Park by Mr. Tibbins and shown to the dining room. The table had been laid for 4, Geoffrey at the head, Lady Iris at the foot, Lady Felicity upon her father's right hand, in her best pale pink silk frock, with a small white lace fichu, and a small pale pink silk ribbon in each of her 2 short plaits, and Diana upon Lady Iris's right hand, in her best plain dove-grey silk gown, with a small white lace fichu of her late mother's at the throat. Geoffrey carved the goose. He did it cleanly, with the small, steady patience of a man who had carved at his father's table since 16. He laid the slices on the warm plates. Mrs. Cardew's bread sauce was passed. The chestnut stuffing was passed. The brown gravy was passed. A glass of pale claret was set at Diana's right hand, and a glass of milk was set at Felicity's left. Felicity, between her father and her aunt, sat very upright and watched. Miss Lockyer. She lifted her chin. Mrs. Cardew made the goose. It is a very fine goose, Lady Felicity. Mrs. Cardew said you should have the best slice because you are a guest. Mrs. Cardew is very kind, Lady Iris said gently. My dear, eat a little. Yes, Aunt Iris. Felicity took up her small fork. Papa, will Miss Lockyer come on Wednesday after Christmas as well? She will, my dear. And on Saturday? And on Saturday? And the Wednesday after that? Geoffrey, in his deep, quiet baritone, set down his carving knife and looked across at his daughter. "Lady Felicity, Miss Lockyer comes on Wednesdays and on Saturdays. That is the arrangement. It does not change." "Good." Felicity, satisfied, ate her piece of goose. Diana, looking across the table at Geoffrey, met for one steady instant the cool storm-grey blue of his eyes. He inclined his head a small quarter of an inch. She inclined hers in return. After dinner, at the 4:30, the household tenants of Westmere Park were presented in the Great Hall, 25 of them in their best Sunday Kent broadcloth and their best Sunday Kent linen, and Geoffrey, standing upon the small step at the foot of the great staircase, with Lady Iris on his left and Diana and Felicity on his right, introduced Diana to them as they came forward each in turn in his deep, quiet baritone. "Miss Lockyer, of Hallam Cottage, Lady Felicity's reader and our neighbour at Hallam Cottage." The household accepted her quietly. The tenants inclined and Miss Lockyer'd her in turn. Mrs. Aldrich, passing behind with a tray of warm spiced cake, gave Diana a small private smile of her steady hazel eye. Mr. Tibbins, at the great door receiving each tenant's hat, inclined his head a half-inch more than ordinary as Diana went past him to the south library. Mrs. Cardew, at the kitchen door watching the great hall through the screen, dabbed her warm pale blue eye with the corner of her white linen apron and pretended she had not. Felicity, when the tenants had gone, drew Diana by the hand into the south library, and from a small flat parcel wrapped in brown paper upon the low table produced a single folded sheet of vellum bound about with a slip of pale blue silk ribbon. "Miss Lockyer, this is for you. I copied it out at Aunt Iris's direction." Diana untied the ribbon. Inside, in a careful round 7-year-old hand, was 12 lines of Cowper. The same passage of the lamp in the cottage window that Diana had read aloud in the lane on the 25th of November. At the foot, in the same careful hand, copied out by Lady Felicity Norwood for Miss Lockyer, this Christmas Day, 1818. Diana, after a small composed silence, knelt upon the rug and put both her gloved hands upon the child's small shoulders. "Lady Felicity, I shall keep it always. Aunt Iris said you would like it. Aunt Iris was right." On the cold blue Sunday evening of the 27th of December, the Boxing Day service at St. Matthew's having ended at the 4:30, the bells having rung out across the cold pale fields, the congregation having dispersed in 2s and 3s down the gravel sweep, Lady Iris drew Diana aside upon the gravel of the south porch. Geoffrey had stayed within the chancel speaking with Reverend Easton upon a parish matter. The south porch was empty, save for the two of them. Lady Iris took Diana's right hand in her own gloved hand and said, in her steady, warm Kent voice, "Miss Lockyer, I shall not press the matter, and I shall not, this side of the spring, raise it again. But I shall tell you once, here, on the south porch of St. Matthew's, that my brother has not looked at any woman in the 2 years since my late sister-in-law, Lady Aurora, died, and that he has, in the 11 weeks since you came to Stilling, looked at no one else. I tell you this once, and I shall not tell you again. You will do with it what you choose." Diana, after a small composed breath, looked up into the older lady's clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes. "Lady Iris, I thank you." Lady Iris squeezed her gloved hand once, gently, and walked on down the gravel sweep, her plain, high-waisted, soft, lavender silk gown showing pale beneath the dark hem of her cloak, leaving Diana a small, composed instant upon the south porch in the cold, pale blue dusk. On the cold, pale blue Sunday evening of the 3rd of January, 1819, at 11 o'clock at night, the household at Westmere Park was abed. Lady Iris in her chamber above the south rose garden was asleep. Lady Felicity in her small chamber above the schoolroom was asleep with her cheek upon the white linen pillow and one small plait fallen across her brow. Nurse Wenwood in the small chamber by the night nursery door was asleep. Mr. Tibbins in the butler's pantry was asleep. Mrs. Aldridge in the housekeeper's room was asleep. Mrs. Cardew below stairs was asleep. The great quiet of a great house at the late hour lay upon Westmere Park. In the south library the fire was at red ember. A single tall, white wax candle burned upon the writing table in the deep recess of the south window. Geoffrey sat alone at the writing table in his shirt sleeves with the dark walnut-brown coat hung over the chair back, the lock fallen across his brow, his right hand with the heavy silver Westmere ducal signet upon it, resting upon a small green calf commonplace book that had been his late father's. He had opened the commonplace book to a fresh page. He had trimmed the pen. He sat a small, steady minute and thought. Then he dipped the pen and wrote in his even, careful hand one composed line. She reads to my daughter the way my mother once read to me. I had not expected to be answered for this loss, in this life, by anyone at all, and I had not, at any time since my Aurora was laid in the family vault, expected to be answered by a young woman of 23 in dove-grey silk on a Wednesday afternoon in October. I shall not ask her until the spring. She has been used these 6 years to silence, and the spring is the proper season for her to be permitted to refuse me without injury. He blotted the line carefully with the small square of pale blotting paper. He set down the pen. He sat a long, quiet minute with his hand upon the page. Outside the leaded window, the cold, pale blue Kent January night was still. It was on the Wednesday, the 13th of January, in the year 1819, at 20 minutes before 12, in a pale grey midwinter forenoon, with a low sun behind a thin pearl-coloured cloud, that a hired post-chaise, a plain, ill-kept, yellow body upon green wheels, the lacquer dulled with road dust, and the off-leader showing a hard breath upon the cold air, turned in at the south gate of Westmere Park, and came at a hard trot up the long lime avenue to the great door. Mr. Tibbins, going to the door upon the second pull of the bell-rope, opened it in steady gravity. The post-boy in his short red jacket touched his cap from the box. From the body of the chaise a gentleman descended, set his beaver hat under his left arm, drew a small card-case from his waistcoat pocket, and presented at the threshold a London card upon which the engraved name read Sir Gervas Trelawney, Baronet, No. 14 Half Moon Street, Piccadilly. Mr. Tibbins read the card once. He inclined his head in the same measured gravity he had used at the great door for 37 years. Sir Gervas, if your honour will be pleased to step within, I shall acquaint his grace. The gentleman thus admitted was a man of 43 years. Sandy grey, thinning hair was carefully oiled forward upon a low brow. The eyes set close beneath were small, shallow, watery, pale blue. The skin was sallow with broken veins across the cheekbones. The chin was weak. The mouth carried at all hours an oily half-smile of practised self-importance. He stood 5'9" in middle height, with a soft paunch already settled beneath the line of the waistcoat. He wore a dark bottle-green wool tailcoat with worn gilt buttons, a primrose-yellow silk waistcoat slightly stained at the lapel, buff pantaloons and top boots with brass tassels, the brass dulled, the leather wanting blacking. A quizzing glass hung on a black silk ribbon at his throat. A plain dark grey beaver hat was tucked under his left arm. He carried no other thing, no stick, no whip, no weapon, and he carried himself with the small, heavy self-consequence of a man accustomed to being received in better houses than his manners deserved. Mr. Tibbins crossed the great hall before him in his steady gravity and showed him into the morning-room. The morning-room at Westmere Park lay at the southeast corner of the house, and opened by 2 tall sash windows upon the south lawn and the bare lime avenue beyond. The walls were pale yellow silk-papered. The chimney-piece was a plain white marble, with a small clear fire of sea coal upon the hearth, A worn Turkey rug, its reds and blues faded by 60 winters of southern sun, lay between the chimney-piece and the windows. There was a small mahogany writing table at the further window, 2 upright chairs, 1 wing chair to the fire. It was a room kept for the receiving of strangers and of village business. It was not a room into which the family sat. Upon this worn Turkey rug, Sir Gervas Trelawney was kept standing. Mr. Tibbins withdrew. The bell sounded once below stairs. Sir Gervas, his oily half-smile in place, and his quizzing-glass turning idly upon its black ribbon, took 2 paces toward the chimney-piece, took 2 paces back, glanced once at the meagre fire as a man pricing the coal, and resumed his stand. The morning-room door opened. Lord Geoffrey Charles Norwood, 4th Duke of Westmere, came in alone. He wore his dark walnut-brown country morning coat and his buff waistcoat, the heavy silver Westmere signet, the stag's head over the sheaf of corn, sat upon the small finger of his right hand. He crossed to the chimney-piece in his quiet, steady tread, set his right hand upon the white marble, and turned, with his firm, grave mouth set, to face the man upon the rug. "Sir Gervas, Your Grace." Sir Gervas made a small, mannered bow, the bow of a man practising in glasses, and recovered his oily smile. "Your Grace is very good to receive a kinsman, however distant, however little known to him in person. I had not, I confess, the honour of waiting upon your Grace at the late, melancholy event of October 16, having been at that time detained in town upon affairs which— Sir Gervas, you are come a long road this morning, pray be plain." The quizzing-glass turned a small turn upon its ribbon. The oily half-smile did not move. "Plain, yes, plain as your Grace pleases. I am come, then, plainly upon a matter which has reached my ears in town, and which, touching as it does the future and the standing of my late cousin's only daughter, your Grace's Lady Felicity, who is by descent my own kinswoman in the 3rd degree, I cannot, as the late Duchess's nearest cousin by descent, be silent upon. Pray go on." "It has been reported to me, by friends in town whose word I have no cause to mistrust, that an ostler bread reader from Bond Street, a young person calling herself Miss Lockyer, daughter, as I am informed, of one Sir Roger Lockyer, Baronet, late of Sussex, has been received within these walls as Lady Felicity's reader, twice in the week, upon a fee. The intelligence is correct." Sir Gervas opened his small watery eyes a little wider, as a man surprised to find his shot landed before he had aimed. "Then your Grace will permit me to set certain matters before you, which the country, in its retirement, may not have come at. The Lockyer bankruptcy of the spring of 1813 is, in town, a matter of public memory. The sums were considerable. The Bank of England was a creditor in the round figure of £14,000, Coates and Company in the round figure of 6,000. There were other claims. The estate of Lockyer Park was found insufficient, and the late baronet, departing in pleurisy in the autumn of that same year, left his only daughter without a portion. The young person has, I am credibly informed, been since 5 years in trade, apprentice and assistant to a French modiste of Bond Street, until her dismissal in September last, that she has, by some country accident of inheritance, become possessed of a cottage in your Grace's village, that she has, by some other accident, been received into your Grace's library. These are matters upon which I, as the nearest cousin by descent of the late Duchess Aurora, and as next of kin to your Grace's heiress in default of issue male, am compelled to speak. You have not yet, Sir Gervas, spoken your matter." The oily half-smile thinned a little. The quizzing-glass turned. "I am come, your Grace, to require, in the gentlest terms a kinsman may use, that this young person be removed from her present office, and that the household of Westmere Park be cleansed of an unsuitable companion for the future Lady Felicity Norwood, who is, by every prospect, to be one of the first ladies of England. I am come, further, your grace, to give your grace warning, though most reluctantly, that should this representation not be heeded, I shall apply, as the nearest cousin, by descent of the late Duchess, to the Court of Chancery for a joint guardianship of Lady Felicity, upon the grounds of her being daily exposed within these walls to disreputable society. The little speech, well rehearsed in some London glass, was delivered with the small turning quizzing glass, and with the practised oily smile in steady place. Sir Gervase concluded, set his left hand upon the lapel of the bottle-green coat, and waited with the air of a man who has discharged a duty and expects to be thanked for it. The Duke did not move from the chimney-piece. His right hand stayed upon the marble. His firm, grave mouth did not alter. When he spoke, it was in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, level as a slow river. Sir Gervase, Lady Felicity is in the care of her father, her aunt Lady Iris, and Nurse Wenwood. Miss Lockyer is a daughter of the late Sir Roger Lockyer, a gentleman of impeccable character, whose financial misfortunes in 1813 were caused by the bankruptcy of his London bank, Tubbs and Plant, and bear no possible weight against his daughter. Miss Lockyer has supported herself for 5 years by her own steady industry. Your application to Chancery shall be answered by my solicitors at your cost. If you persist in this matter, I shall lay it before Lord Chancellor Eldon at the next term. Mr. Tibbins, his lordship is leaving us. The bell-rope at the chimney-piece had not been touched, but the door behind Sir Gervase had opened upon the syllable. Mr. Tibbins, who knew the timbre of his master's closing voice as a sexton knows the hour of his bell, stood in the doorway in his steady gravity, the right hand laid open in the small grave gesture by which 50 years of butlers in 50 great houses have shown gentlemen to their carriages. Sir Gervase's oily half-smile did not quite hold. The small-mannered voice rose half an octave and went shrill. Your Grace will not... Your Grace cannot mean... The world, sir, the world will hear of it. The world shall speak. I have at my command in town a circle, sir, which your Grace shall hear of this matter again, and not, I fancy, to your Grace's satisfaction. The Lockyer name is not a name that... Sir Gervase, the hired chaise is at the door. The quizzing glass turned hard upon its black silk ribbon and struck the stained primrose lapel. Sir Gervase fumbled at it, recovered it, clapped his beaver hat upon his oiled head, not quite straight, made a small jerk of a bow at the chimney-piece, and was conducted across the great hall by Mr. Tibbins in the same steady gravity with which he had been admitted. The great door closed behind him upon a thin, clean January air. The hired chaise wheeled upon the gravel-sweep, the post-boy cracked his whip, and the dull-lacquered yellow body went away down the long lime avenue at a hard trot. The Duke stood a long minute at the southern sash of the morning-room window. He watched the chaise diminish between the bare lime trunks. He watched it pass the south lodge. He watched the lodge-keeper's small grey dog come to the gate and stand. When the chaise was gone behind the elbow of the avenue, he turned from the window, crossed to the bell-pull beside the chimney-piece, and pulled it once. Mr. Tibbins, the mare in 20 minutes. I shall ride to Hallam Cottage at 2:30. Very good, your Grace. At 2:30, the Duke rode down the chalk lane to the village in a thin, cold winter sun. The mare was put up at the Trundles' yard. He walked the last quarter-mile to Hallam Cottage on foot. Mrs. Aldridge, who had come down to the cottage that morning upon the parish coal business and had stayed, opened the small green door to him. She took his hat and his riding gloves in her steady, kind hand and showed him into the parlour. She set herself at the parlour door with her work-basket, as the proper companion, and took up her sewing. Diana rose from her small writing-desk by the leaded window. She wore a plain dark grey wool morning gown with a white muslin fichu at the throat, and a small black jet brooch at the breast. Her dark honey-blonde hair was pinned smooth in its low chignon. The small natural beauty mark below the right corner of her lower lip caught the thin window light. "Your Grace." "Miss Lockyer, the favour of a small private word if Mrs. Aldridge will be so good." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Aldridge inclined her steady, kind head and did not lift her eyes from her seam. He set out the matter in his steady gravity, standing by the small parlour fire with his right hand upon the painted deal mantel. The call of Sir Gervase at noon, the engraved London card, the rehearsed speech about an Ostler-bred reader from Bond Street, the alleged grievance touching the daughter of a bankrupt baronet, the named sums of the Lockyer bankruptcy of 1813, as Sir Gervase had named them, the threat of an application to Chancery for joint guardianship upon the ground of disreputable society. He set it out without softening and without colour. He laid no weight upon the man, he laid no weight upon himself. He did not press her. At the close he asked, in his quiet baritone, one plain thing. "Miss Lockyer, is there any threat in him?" Diana stood very still by the small writing desk. Her clear, soft, slate-grey eyes met his in steady, direct gaze. She drew one composed, small breath. When she spoke, it was in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, low and clear as a winter stream beneath a thin ice. "Your Grace." Only such as a small wasp may make in a closed library. He cannot, by any construction of which I am aware, take Lady Felicity from her father. The Lockyer bankruptcy was no part of mine. My father's name was given a public exoneration in the Gazette of June 1814. I have the cutting in the leather portfolio in my writing desk. I shall fetch it. She opened the small lid of the writing desk. She lifted out the leather portfolio she had carried under her left arm, down from the mail coach in October. She opened it in steady fingers upon the desk. She drew from the inner pocket a small, carefully folded square of the London Gazette and laid it open upon the desk before him. The cutting was dated the 12th of June, 1814. The London Bank Tubs and Plant of Lombard Street was there named as the cause of the late Sir Roger Lockyer's distress. The late baronet was named, in the formal language of the Gazette, as a creditor wholly innocent of any fraud, and as one who had himself been the heaviest sufferer by the bank's failure. The sums of his own losses were set out, £9,480. There was a small further paragraph in which the partners of Tubbs and Plant were named in the criminal proceeding. The Duke read the cutting once. He read it again. He laid it back upon the leather portfolio with the same steady gravity with which he had laid his hand upon the marble at noon. He inclined deeply. "Miss Lockyer, the cutting shall go up by tonight's post to Mr. Penhallow at Lincoln's Inn. Sir Gervase shall not press his bill into the second term." "Your Grace is very good. It is not goodness, Miss Lockyer. It is justice. The cutting is yours. I shall have it copied and the original returned by Friday." He took the small square between the page of a folded sheet for the post. He bowed. He went out into the small flagged passage where Mrs. Aldridge stood with his hat and his gloves. He passed back into the lane. The mare came up from the Trundles' yard. By 3 he was at Westmere Park again, and by 10 minutes past 3, Diana was within the South Library reading the new picture book of Aesop's Fables to Lady Felicity upon the South Library sofa. Lady Felicity, in her plain pale blue wool schoolgirl's frock and her white pinafore, sat with her short, walnut-brown plaits laid neatly upon her thin shoulders, and her clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes very serious upon the page. The fable of the Lion and the Mouse was read first, in steady, soft, warm, low alto, the cadence quiet and the small voices of beasts distinct and never showy. The fable of the ant and the grasshopper followed, the fable of the fox and the grapes after that. The child laughed once at the fox and pressed her small ribboned head against Diana's sleeve at the close. Lady Iris, at the fire with her embroidery, silver-grey hair, beneath her small white lace cap, the small black jet brooch at her throat, watched Diana over the rim of her work and approved quietly. She did not speak across the reading. When the hour was struck by the long case clock in the south corner, she set down her needle, rose, and laid her dry, kind hand for a small instant upon Diana's shoulder as she passed. The reading went the proper hour. Felicity was settled. Nurse Wenwood, at the south library door with her sewing basket, rose to take the child up to the schoolroom for her milk. Diana folded the picture book carefully, set it upon the small side table, and rose. Geoffrey, at his writing table by the further window, looked once across the room at her in steady gravity and inclined his head. He did not, in the hearing of his sister, of his daughter, of the nurse at the door, speak. On the Friday following, Friday the 15th of January, at 12 at noon, a hired post-chaise of an entirely better keeping than Sir Gervaise's drew up upon the gravel sweep of Westmere Park, and from it descended a gentleman whom Mr. Tibbins received at the great door in steady gravity and with the small private easing of a man receiving an expected friend. Mr. Penhallow was 49. His thinning silver-grey hair was carefully combed back from a high broad scholar's forehead. Steady grey eyes looked out behind small gold-rimmed spectacles set straight upon a thin, straight nose. The indoor pallor was fair. The long, narrow scholar's face was clean-shaven. The mouth was firm and quiet. He stood tall, 6 foot, thin, with a slight stoop of the long study at his shoulder. He wore plain black, superfine, a white cravat, a black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, and polished black shoes. He carried under his right arm a leather-bound client's ledger. In his left hand, a small folded square he had had by yesterday's post, the Gazette cutting of June 1814. He was shown into the South Library. The Duke rose from the writing table. The two men shook hands in the small, grave manner of long understanding. Mr. Penhallow set the leather ledger upon the table. He set the cutting beside it. He sat in the further wing chair and unfolded the cutting upon his knee. He read it once. He read it again. He set his spectacles a small thumb-breadth further upon his thin nose. When he spoke, it was in his thin scholar's voice, dry, level, exact as a clerk's pen. Your Grace, the cutting establishes Sir Roger Lockyer's exoneration beyond ordinary question. I shall make inquiry of Sir Gervase Trelawney's London solicitor this week, if he has retained one. I shall report by the Tuesday next. Mr. Penhallow, inquire also into Sir Gervase's affairs generally, the standing of his accounts, the standing of his London circle. I have a small unease which the man's bearing did not relieve. Mr. Penhallow inclined the thinning silver-grey head. He folded the cutting back into its square, set it within the leather ledger, took up the ledger. He drank 1 cup of cold beef tea, standing at the South Library fire, and was again in the hired chaise upon the gravel sweep by 20 minutes past 1. By the dusk of the same Friday, he was at his rooms in Lincoln's Inn. Upon the Tuesday following, Tuesday the 19th of January, in the Morning Post, a letter under Mr. Penhallow's private seal was brought up to the South Library by Mr. Tibbins upon the small silver salver. The Duke broke the seal at the writing table by the further window. He read the letter once. He read it again. Mr. Penhallow wrote, in his small, even scholar's hand, that he had made inquiry through a clerk of his acquaintance at Furnival's Inn. The clerk had inquired further at 3 London houses. The intelligence was these. Sir Gervase Trelawney had retained no London solicitor. He had applied to 2, of whom one had refused him without an appointment, and the other had required a deposit which Sir Gervase had not laid down. He had standing gambling debts at Boodle's in the figure of £2,700, and at Brooks's in the figure of £1,500, together, in the round, £4,200. His 3 London bankers, Drummond's, Hawes, and the small private house of Marsh and Sibbald, had each, within the last month, declined to accept further drawings upon his account without lodged security, of which he could lay down none. He was wholly without the means to file a chancery bill upon credit, the fees of such a bill being not less than £80 at first hearing. The threat, Mr. Penhallow concluded, was empty. There was no application. There would be no application. Sir Gervase had spent his powder in the morning room at Westmere. The Duke folded the letter once. He laid it upon the writing table at his right hand. He looked, for a small composed instant, at the small clear sea-coal fire upon the south library hearth. He turned in his steady gravity to Mr. Tibbins, who stood at the small distance the long-served butler keeps after the salver is delivered. "That is the end of it, Tibbins." "Very good, Your Grace." Mr. Tibbins inclined his thinning silver-grey head and withdrew. The Duke set his right hand upon the folded letter, and the small sea-coal fire upon the hearth burned quietly on. The Monday morning's post from town came up to Westmere Park at 9:20 in the cold, pale blue last week of January, in a leather bag carried in by the second footman and laid upon the breakfast-table sideboard upon a small silver salver. Lady Iris, seated in her usual place at the round breakfast-table in the small east parlour, was already at her tea. Geoffrey was at the broad sheet of the Morning Post. The fire was low and steady in the grate. Outside the leaded window, the long bare elm at the carriage sweep stood still and bare, against a sky the colour of weak milk. Lady Iris took up the bag, drew out 3 letters, set 2 aside, and opened the third with a small ivory paper knife. She read it through in steady silence. She set it down upon the breakfast cloth. She poured herself a fresh cup of tea. Then she said in her steady, warm Kent voice, without lifting her eyes from the cloth, "Geoffrey, Sefton writes from Hill Street." Geoffrey laid down his sheet. "She informs me," Lady Iris went on, "that Sir Gervase Trelawney has, these 10 days past, been telling the story at Boodle's, the story being, in his own form, that the widowed Duke of Westmere is courting a milliner from Bond Street, and that the Lockyer girl has insinuated herself into Lady Felicity's nursery." She did not raise her voice. She did not flush. She poured a little more milk into her tea and stirred it once. "He has spoken it," she said, "in the card-room on the Friday, at the long table on the Saturday, and to a small standing party at the bow window on the Sunday afternoon. Sefton heard it from Castlereagh, who had it of Jersey, who had it of her brother. It is by this morning the story in 3 drawing-rooms. By the end of the week it shall be the story in 15. Geoffrey set his sheet aside. He folded his napkin. He looked across at his sister in her usual place and at the small black jet brooch at her throat. He said, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, with the steady economy of a man who has already settled the matter in his head, "Iris, the matter shall be set straight in town this fortnight. You shall go up." Lady Iris inclined her head a small composed half-inch. "I had intended," she said, "to go up on Wednesday." He nodded once. He took up his sheet again. He said nothing further. She drank her tea. The footman came in noiselessly and removed the breakfast bag. Outside the leaded window, a single rook, very black against the milky sky, lifted from the bare elm and went away east toward the home wood, and the small east parlour at Westmere Park returned to the steady quiet of a fire burning low in a clean grate at 9:25 of a Monday morning in the last week of January, in the year of our Lord 1819. She went up on the Wednesday, as she had said. The family travelling coach was ordered for 8. Her woman, Wilkins, sat opposite her with the small dressing-case at her feet. The 2 greys took the chalk road north at a steady 10 miles to the hour, and by 5:30 of the same cold afternoon, the coach drew up at the small, handsome, flat-fronted house in Hill Street, Mayfair, that had been the Westmere's townhouse since the second Duke. The holland covers were off the drawing room by the next morning. The fires were lit. The knocker was on the door. She gave herself the first day to settle. The holland covers shaken out, the small back parlour aired, the cards written at the writing desk overlooking Hill Street, and a quiet half-hour to set down, upon a single sheet of cream paper, the form of the account she meant to give. On the Friday, she sent out her cards. She called first upon Lady Sefton in Grosvenor Square, who received her at once in the small back drawing-room and took both her hands. Lady Iris sat upon the rose silk sofa and gave, in her steady, warm Kent voice, the account she had drawn up in the coach upon the way. That Miss Diana Lockyer was the only daughter of the late Sir Roger Lockyer, Baronet of Lockyer Park in Sussex, a gentleman of impeccable character, publicly exonerated of any fraud whatever, in the London Gazette of June 1814, that the misfortune that had carried away her father's estate had been caused, plainly and entirely, by the bankruptcy of Tubbs and Plant of the Strand, that Miss Lockyer had supported herself for upwards of 5 years by her own steady industry as an assistant to Madame Lefebvre of Bond Street, that she had come into a small inheritance from her late maternal aunt, Mrs. Goodyear of Stilling Village in Kent, and was at present in possession of Hallam Cottage and an annuity of £60, that she had been received at Westmere Park as Lady Felicity's reader on Lady Iris's own warm and considered recommendation, and that any further public mention of the matter by Sir Gervase Trelawney should meet, by return of post, with action. Lady Sefton listened to the whole, without once interrupting. At the close she said, "My dear, I shall have it about town by tea-time." From Grosvenor Square, Lady Iris went on, in the same afternoon, to Devonshire House, where the Duchess received her in the long yellow drawing-room and heard the account a second time, and said, in her own dry, quiet way, that she had never thought Gervase Trelawney had a particle of sense, and that she should be glad to have a small reason to say so in company. From Devonshire House to the Countess Spencer in St. James's Place on the Saturday afternoon, where the account was given a third time and met with the steady, old-fashioned Whig firmness of a woman who had known Sir Roger Lockyer's father in the 70s. From the Countess Spencer on the Monday to Lady Jersey at Berkeley Square, who heard the account in her small green parlour with one hand upon her lapdog, and at the close said only in her clipped, quick way, "He shall not have his card next Wednesday." From Lady Jersey on the Tuesday to Lady Cowper, who said little, but smiled the small, steady smile of a woman who has made up her mind. And finally, on the Thursday afternoon, to Lady Castlereagh, who received her in the long blue drawing-room at the Foreign Secretary's house, and, having heard the account through, set down her teacup and said, very quietly, "My dear Iris, the matter is settled." By the close of the Thursday, it was settled in fact. On the Friday, Sir Gervase Trelawney was, by the unanimous, quiet decision of the committee, struck from the visitors' book at Boodle's for the present season. On the Saturday morning, he received, by the early post, 3 identical small letters from his Sunday whist circle informing him that his attendance was no longer required at the Tuesday evenings in St. James's. And by the Saturday afternoon, his 3 creditors in Holborn had each, separately and without the knowledge of the others, called upon him at his rooms in Half Moon Street, where they had remained a considerable time. Lady Iris heard the 3 pieces of news in the same evening at Lady Sefton's. She received them with the steady small inclination of her head, and said only of the third, "That I had not arranged, but I cannot say I regret it." She returned to Westmere on the Saturday following, the 6th of February, in the family travelling coach, with Wilkins opposite her and the small dressing-case at her feet, and the matter, in town, was finished. February at Stilling was the steady plateau of a winter that had given up its sharpest cold. The Wednesday and Saturday readings at Westmere Park continued without alteration. Felicity, on the South Library sofa with her plait against Diana's shoulder, was now well into the second volume of the Pony Stories and had begun to ask, at the close of each chapter, whether the brown pony should come right in the end. The village, having had its quiet meeting in 3 drawing rooms by the means of Lady Iris's letters to Mrs. Eldridge and the rectory, greeted Diana now not only by name, but with the small, steady warmth of a parish that had decided. Mrs. Trundle, meeting her at the village shop on a Friday morning, asked after the cottage's east chimney and offered a small bag of pippins from her own loft. Mr. Eldridge, behind the post-counter, knew her hand at 50 paces and put her letters aside in a small folded packet until she came down for them. The blacksmith's wife, who had been the doubtful one in November, walked across the green on a Tuesday in the 3rd week to give her a small jar of bramble jelly and a polite word about her aunt. Reverend Easton, at the close of a parish reader meeting in his rectory on a Wednesday evening in the middle of the month, spoke once, only once, in steady kind gravity, to the 8 or 9 villagers who served as readers to the bedridden and the elderly. He said that he had been a curate in the parish 30 years before, that he had known Mrs. Goodyear in her steady kindness, and that he had not, in honest truth, expected the line of that kindness to be carried on so handsomely by her niece in the present year. He did not say more. Diana, sitting in her plain dark green wool gown by the rectory fire, answered in her steady, soft, warm, low alto that she was very glad to be the parish's reader, and that her aunt had taught her in childhood the chief part of what she knew of how to be of small use. The meeting moved on to other business. Reverend Easton, walking her to the rectory gate at the close, did not return to the subject. Geoffrey continued to walk her down the chalk to Hallam Cottage at the close of each Wednesday and Saturday afternoon. The walk was, by the middle of February, a steady, fixed thing, 1/2 mile in the long grey winter light, sometimes in a small drizzle, and sometimes in the cold pale blue clearing of a late afternoon, with the lantern hanging unlit in his right hand against the longer evenings. He did not press her. He did not speak of the spring. He did not say what he had written, in his late father's commonplace book, on the Sunday evening in early January. He carried her basket once or twice a week now, when she had been at the village shop upon the way up, and he carried it back without comment, setting it down upon the small oak table inside her cottage door, and standing the proper small composed half-minute upon her threshold, before he turned and went back up the lane in the gathering dusk. He was, in the steady quiet of his own counsel, waiting upon a date he had set himself, the 15th of April, the close of the parish readers' quarter day, at 3 o'clock in the parlour of Hallam Cottage. On the Wednesday afternoon of the 31st of March, the date was taken out of his hands. The reading had run its proper hour. Felicity, in her plain pale blue wool with the white pinafore, had been on Diana's lap, upon the South Library sofa for the second half, with the picture book of the river and the small boys upon it that Diana had brought up from Hallam in her basket. Lady Iris had been at the fire with her embroidery the first half, and had then, at 3:30, stepped out by the kitchen passage to speak with Mrs. Cardew about the household supper. Geoffrey was at his writing table by the south window, with a letter from Mr. Penhallow open under his right hand. Nurse Wenwood sat upon her low chair by the door with her sewing. The fire was burning low in the grate. Diana closed the book quietly upon the last page and set it down upon her knee. Felicity sat up. She turned upon Diana's lap to look at her properly. She gathered the end of her own plait between her 2 small fingers in the small considering way that was her father's and not her mother's. She said in her clear small voice plainly, "Miss Diana, are you going to be my papa's wife?" The room stilled. The fire ticked once. The pen at the writing table did not move. Diana, after a small, composed breath, laid her hand quietly upon the smooth, dark, walnut-brown plait beside her own wrist. She said in her steady, soft, warm, low alto, without any lift of her voice, "Lady Felicity, I do not know. Your papa has not asked me." Felicity considered this for the small, proper instant. Then she said with the steady, factual gravity of a child who has been told a thing by an aunt, "He will. Aunt Iris says so." Geoffrey, at the writing table, did not lift his head. The dark walnut-brown hair with the silver streak above the left temple did not turn. The firm, grave mouth was set. The pen lay quiet under his right hand. Nurse Wenwood, at the door, did not lift her eyes from her sewing. Her needle went steadily on, in, out, through the small white linen square upon her knee. Diana lifted Felicity quietly down from her lap, set her upon her own small feet upon the turkey rug, smoothed the white pinafore at her shoulder, and said, in the same steady, soft, warm, low alto, "Come, my dear. Nurse shall take you up." Nurse Wenwood rose. Felicity took her hand. The door closed behind them. Diana sat a small, composed minute by the fire alone, before rising to take her bonnet from the side table. That night at Westmere, at 11 o'clock, when the household was abed and the long corridors quiet, Geoffrey came down by the side stair to the south library with his candle. He set the candle upon the writing table. He drew out the small green-calf commonplace book of his late father from the bottom drawer. He turned the leaves to the line he had written there on the Sunday evening in early January. He took his pen. He wrote, beneath that first line, in his steady, fine hand, a second composed line. My daughter has asked her plainly what I had thought to ask in late April. I had set the date for the 15th of April on the conclusion of the parish readers' quarter day. My daughter has set it for me at the close of the Wednesday afternoon of the 31st of March, in the South Library at Westmere Park, with her aunt absent at the kitchen passage and her nurse at the door with her sewing. I shall ask on the 10th of April at 3 o'clock in the parlour of Hallam Cottage, in a single visit at which Mrs. Aldridge shall attend, and I shall not bring Felicity, who is to be at her aunt's tea with the Reverend Easton at that hour. If she refuses me, she shall do so on the proper terms and at her own quiet leisure. He blotted the line. He set the small green-calf commonplace book back in the bottom drawer. He took up his candle. He went back up the side stair to bed. The first week of April was a steady, soft week of small, pale green leaves coming out upon the elm at the carriage sweep and the first primroses opening in the lane down to Hallam. Then, on the Friday afternoon of the 2nd of April, by the London post that came in at the village shop at 4:30, Diana received a single letter in a hand she had not seen in 6 years in writing. She took it home to Hallam, unsealed it in her parlour with her bonnet still on, and read it through standing at the leaded window. It was from her cousin, Sir Hugh Lockyer, the cousin into whom the entail of Lockyer Park had passed on her father's death in 1813, and who had not written to her once in 5 years since the formal lawyer's letter of October of that year. The hand was brief, courteous, and embarrassed. Sir Hugh wrote that he had heard, from his Yorkshire neighbour, Sir Gervase Trelawney, of certain difficulties attaching to a Miss Diana Lockyer of Stilling by the Down in Kent, that he wrote, with some delicacy, to ask whether the said Miss Lockyer was, in fact, his cousin, and that, should she wish to remove herself from the present situation, his wife Lady Lockyer was prepared to offer her a small household allowance of £30 per annum to remove to Yorkshire, where a small set of rooms in the south wing of the house might, with a little adjustment, be made over to her. He remained with respect, her cousin's most obliged servant. Diana read the letter through a second time. She set it upon her small writing desk by the leaded window. She took off her bonnet and laid it on the chair. She trimmed the lamp. She took out her plain cream paper and her pen. She wrote her reply, in her steady, fine hand, the same afternoon. She thanked Sir Hugh for his inquiry. She informed him that she had been in Kent, since the second Tuesday of October upon a small inheritance from her late maternal aunt, Mrs. Goodyear of Stilling Village, that she was in present possession of Hallam Cottage and of an annuity of £60, which sum was sufficient to her wants, that she had no present plan to remove to Yorkshire, and that she was, with steady gratitude for his inquiry, his cousin's most obliged and most humble servant. She signed it. She read it once through. She sealed it. She took it down to the village post on the Saturday morning herself, in her plain dark green wool gown and her plain dark grey silk bonnet, and gave it into Mr. Eldridge's hand at the post counter for the Saturday noon coach, back to London. She walked home up the lane. She did not mention the letter to Geoffrey, nor to Lady Iris, nor to Mrs. Aldridge. She did not weep. She set the matter, in her own steady, composed way, behind her, and went about the small, ordinary business of a Saturday in a cottage in a Kent village in the first warm week of April. She trimmed the small front bed, she dusted the parlour, she swept the small step at the parlour door, and at 4 o'clock, in the steady pale gold falling of the afternoon's good light through the leaded panes, she set the kettle upon the hob and took down the small cracked blue and white china cup that had been her aunt's, and made her tea, and drank it quietly at the small oak table by the leaded window, and did not, in any small particular, allow her hand to shake upon the saucer. On the Friday evening of the 9th of April, Geoffrey came down from his own dressing-room by the side stair to the south library at 11 o'clock at night. The household was abed. The corridors were quiet. He set his candle upon the writing-table by the south window, in the same place he had set it on the Wednesday night of the 31st of March. He drew out the small green calf commonplace book of his late father from the bottom drawer. He laid it open upon the writing-table. He took his pen. He took a fresh quarter-sheet of plain cream paper. He drafted, in his steady, fine hand, the proposal he intended to make at 3 o'clock the following afternoon in the parlour of Hallam Cottage, with Mrs. Aldridge at the parlour door, with her sewing and Felicity 10 miles off at her Aunt Iris's tea with the Reverend Easton. He wrote it through. He read it. He took a fresh quarter-sheet and wrote it through a second time. Fair. A single, low, sustained sentence, beginning with her name and ending with the steady, proper old word of asking. He laid down the pen. He read the fair copy aloud once to himself in the deep, clear, quiet baritone, the room empty, the fire low, the long leaded window black against the cold, pale blue Kent April night. The sentence stood. He was satisfied. He blotted the page. He folded the fair copy once and slid it inside the front board of the small green calf commonplace book. He closed the book. He set it back in the bottom drawer of the writing-table. He turned down the candle to a thin, steady half-inch flame. Outside the leaded window, the cold, pale blue Kent April night was still. No wind, no rook, the small bare branch of the wisteria against the glass not moving. The clock upon the south library mantel, the small ormolu clock that had been his mother's, struck the 11:15 in 2 clear, small notes. He stood a long, quiet minute at the window, with his right hand resting upon the sill, and the silver streak above his left temple just catching the candlelight, looking out at the still pale night and at the dim pale shape of the long lawn falling away to the home wood. And then he took up his candle and went up by the side stair to bed. Saturday the 10th of April, 1819, came in pale and clear over Stilling by the Down, with the chalk lane up to the park white in the late morning sun, and the hedgerows lately budded, and the first of the year's primroses out in the long grass at the foot of the Leach Gate. At a little before 3 in the afternoon, the Duke of Westmere came down the chalk lane in his country boots, walking with a single white camellia from the Westmere hothouse, held very carefully in his right hand between his thumb and the first knuckle of his forefinger, and his face composed in the steady grave quiet that the household at the park had come, in 6 months, to know as the look he wore on Tuesdays and Fridays. He did not, this afternoon, come alone in the strict sense. Behind him by some 60 yards walked his daughter in her plain pale blue wool, holding Nurse Wenwood's hand and asking every 10 paces whether her papa knew they were following him, and being answered every 10 paces that her papa did not. Geoffrey reached the wicket of Hallam Cottage at the half-quarter. Mrs. Aldridge was already at the parlour door inside, her work-basket on her knee, taking the hem on a piece of plain linen with the small steady stitches of a woman who knew, this afternoon, that her hem was a pretence. He lifted the latch. The parlour was quiet. Diana sat at her small writing desk by the leaded window with a sheet of household accounts before her, her quill in her right hand, and the warm, pale blue afternoon light upon the side of her face and upon the smooth, low coil at the nape of her neck. She set the quill down. She rose. Her cheek had a faint, warm rose come up upon it. Her eyes were steady. He stepped into the parlour. He inclined his head to Mrs. Aldridge, who returned the inclination over her hem without speaking. He crossed the worn Turkey rug and set the white camellia, with a small particular care, upon the sheet of accounts beside her hand. "Miss Lockyer, Your Grace." He looked at her for a small breath. Then, with no awkward business of arrangement, he went down upon one knee on the worn rug beside the desk, and rested his right hand upon the polished edge of it, and lifted his face to her. "Miss Lockyer, I have called upon you every Tuesday afternoon and every Friday morning, on no proper pretence of business these 6 months past. I have brought my daughter to your cottage twice a week these 6 months past, on the proper pretence of business and the improper pretence of her 7-year-old want of you. I had not, on the morning we met at the village shop, believed I would marry again, and I had not, on the morning your aunt died, believed any niece of hers could have set my house in motion in 6 months. I have loved you, Miss Lockyer, since the night Felicity climbed onto your lap at dinner 3 days after your arrival in the parish. I have known I loved you since the 11th of December. I have known I should ask you since the Sunday of Christmas Eve. Will you do me the honour of becoming my wife?" He had said it in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, without hurry and without inflection, beyond the steady courtesy that had been the note of him these 6 months. The leaded window let in one small dust mote of pale yellow light across the rug between them. The clock went on with its small, even tick. Diana stood very still. She did not look down at the camellia. She did not look down at him. She looked in the way of a woman who has been 6 months composing this answer without permitting herself to compose it, straight into his face. She drew one small, composed breath. "Your Grace, I shall." He bowed his head once over the polished edge of the writing desk. He lifted her left hand from where it rested upon the chair back beside her, and brought it very briefly to his mouth, and laid it back, and did not yet rise from the rug. For there had come, at this same instant, the small, clear scampering of a child's slippers on the flagstones of the kitchen passage, and then a small, clear voice in the parlour doorway saying, in a tone of perfect, arrested recognition, "Papa!" Felicity stood in the doorway, her 2 plaits a little disordered, her cheeks pink from the walk, Nurse Wenwood 10 paces behind her at a halt, in the small, frozen courtesy of a servant who has understood what she has walked into. Felicity looked at her father upon one knee on the rug. She looked at Diana, standing at the desk with the white camellia laid upon the accounts. She looked back at her father. Diana, after a small, steady breath, lifted her right hand very quietly to the child. Felicity, at her stepmother's lifted hand, crossed the rug at the small, unhurried pace of a child who has finally arrived at the place she has been walking towards for 6 months, and climbed into her father's lap upon the rug and settled her cheek against his lapel, and looked up into his face with her clear, cool, storm grey-blue eyes, very steady. "I told you, Papa." Geoffrey's mouth went, for the first time in the 6 months Mrs. Aldridge had been watching him, into a small, clear smile. He laid his hand upon the back of his daughter's plaited head. He did not speak. He looked, over the top of her, at Diana standing at the writing desk, with her left hand still where his mouth had left it. And Diana looked back at him with the smallest small wet brightness come up upon the lower lash of her left eye, and the composed, steady mouth that he had loved since the 11th of December held quite still. Mrs. Aldridge, at the parlour door, finished a stitch and set the hem upon her knee, and said nothing at all, and let the small, even tick of the clock on the parlour mantel be the only sound in the parlour for some considerable count of breaths. That evening at Westmere Park, in the South Library after dinner, Lady Iris was told. She sat in her usual left-hand chair at the fire with her embroidery upon her knee, and her clear, cool, storm grey-blue eyes very steady upon her brother's face as he spoke. And when he had finished in 8 composed sentences, she set the embroidery aside upon the small walnut table at her elbow, and rose and crossed the carpet to where Diana stood beside the writing table, and took both of Diana's hands into her own, and pressed them once, and said in her quiet, firm voice, "My dear, I am very glad." Then she did, for the first count of 6 in 20 months, weep, one small, clear pair of tears, no more, and laughed in the small way of a woman who has determined upon laughter, through them, and said, "Forgive me. Aurora was the kindest sister-in-law a spinster aunt was ever sent. I had not believed I should see another. I am very glad." Diana pressed her hand. Felicity, who had been permitted, as a great concession of the evening, to stay up to 9, sat upon the carpet at her stepmother's foot, with her cheek against her stepmother's knee, and her hand inside her father's hand. The clock upon the South Library mantel struck 9. Mr. Tibbins brought up the port upon the small silver salver. He set it upon the writing table. He inclined his head once, in his long, kind face, with his pale blue, finely lined eyes, very steady upon his master's, and said, in his even butler's voice, "Your Grace, the household joins me in offering its most respectful felicitations. Mrs. Cardew has begged me to say that she will bake the cake." Geoffrey inclined his head once in return. Mr. Tibbins withdrew. The fire crackled small upon the hearth. Lady Iris took up her embroidery again. Felicity, by 9:30, was asleep with her cheek upon her stepmother's knee, and was carried up by Nurse Wenwood at the 9:45. The banns of marriage between Lord Geoffrey Charles Norwood, 4th Duke of Westmere Park in this parish, and Miss Diana Lockyer of Hallam Cottage in this parish, were read at St. Matthew's, Stilling Village, upon the Sundays of the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th of April, 1819, by the Reverend Easton, in his black cassock and his white linen surplice, and his small gold-rimmed spectacles, at the morning service, in the steady, honest voice that the parish had heard, read out the births and the deaths and the marriages and the calls to prayer for 19 years. No impediment was alleged. The village, in the back pews, exchanged in those 3 successive Sundays the small particular nods that a village exchanges when a thing it has watched come on for 6 months has at last come to its proper conclusion. And Mrs. Trundle, the 2nd Sunday, was observed at the Lich Gate after the service to wipe one eye briskly with the corner of her cloak, and to remark, to no one in particular, that it was very satisfactory. Saturday morning, the 1st of May, 1819, came in mild and bright at 10 o'clock at St. Matthew's. The Norman Tower stood pale in the spring sun. The plain oak pews were full to the back. The Reverend Easton stood at the altar in his white linen surplice with his small silver crucifix upon its black silk cord. his honest hazel eyes behind their small gold-rimmed spectacles very steady, the book open before him. Geoffrey stood at the chancel step in his black, superfine wedding tailcoat, the Westmere signet upon his right hand, one fallen lock across his brow, his face composed and pale. Lady Iris, in her lavender silk, stood within the chancel rail. Mr. Penhallow, who had come down on the Friday mail coach from town with the marriage settlement signed, and the small, leather-bound client's ledger left, for once, upon his writing table in Bedford Square, waited at the church door with the bride upon his arm. The family solicitor, in his plain black superfine and his polished black shoes, standing in the place of any nearer kin and taking it by his quiet, long, narrow scholar's face as one of the considerable honours of his 49 years. The bells of St. Matthew's struck the hour. Lady Felicity, at the head of the small procession, in her plain pale blue wool with a fresh white sash and her 2 short plaits in fresh white ribbon, carried before her a small posy of pale pink primroses, gathered that morning from the long grass at the foot of the Westmere south wall by Mrs. Aldridge and Mrs. Cardew between them at 7:30. She walked in the perfect steady small pace of a child who has been told that she has the most important office of the morning and has believed it entirely, up the centre aisle to the chancel step, and turned and stood very small and very upright at her Aunt Iris's hand. Diana came up the aisle upon Mr. Penhallow's arm. She wore high-waisted ivory silk, with the Westmere diamonds at her throat, and her late mother's small pearl-drop earrings. Her dark honey-blonde hair was smooth in its low chignon under a wreath of fresh white may blossom. Her clear, soft, slate-grey eyes were very steady. The faint, warm rose flush across the cheekbones was a little deeper than usual. She did not look to the side. She looked the length of the aisle, straight at the man waiting at the chancel step in the black superfine. Mr. Penhallow gave her hand into Geoffrey's at the step, and bowed once, in his slight stoop, and retired. The Reverend Easton began. The vows passed in the small, even cadence of a village priest who has read this office in this church 240 times, and yet read it this morning as though it were the first time he had ever read it. Geoffrey's deep, clear, quiet baritone made its responses without hurry. Diana's soft, warm, low alto made its responses without hurry. The plain gold band that Geoffrey had ordered 3 weeks since from the small jeweller at Maidstone was set upon her gloved finger. The Reverend Easton declared them, before God and the parish, husband and wife. The bells of St. Matthew's rang. The parish came out into the May sun. Felicity, between her father and her stepmother at the church door, lifted her small posy of pale pink primroses to her stepmother's hand, and kept hold of the stems through the receiving line, and did not that morning let go of them at all. The wedding breakfast was at Westmere Park. Mrs. Cardew's cake stood at the centre of the long table in the small dining room, a single tier of plain almond paste over the rich fruit, the icing piped by Mrs. Cardew's own hand at 5 that morning in the small steady letters that spelt the joined initials of Geoffrey and Diana within a wreath of pale pink primroses and a sprig of fresh white may blossom laid at the top. Mr. Tibbins served, with the long, kind face he kept for occasions of importance, in his black butler's tailcoat at its most exact. Lady Iris rose at the head of the table. She spoke one small grace. Lord, who hast joined this house once again, bless this bread and bless this cake and bless this marriage. Amen. The table answered. The plates went round. Mr. Penhallow rose at the foot. He had not, in 29 years of country dinners, been called upon to make the country toast, and had thought on the Friday mail coach down from town that he should very much prefer not to. He cleared his long throat once, to the bride and the bridegroom, to the new Duchess of Westmere, to Lady Felicity, and to the long quiet good of Stilling by the Down. The country wishes them well. The table answered. Felicity, who had eaten one small slice of cold ham and 2 small slices of bread and butter, was lifted by her stepmother onto her stepmother's lap for the cake. She took her piece in her small, careful fingers and looked up into Diana's face with her clear, cool, storm-grey blue eyes and said very quietly, "Mamma." Diana did not, at the long table in front of Mrs. Aldridge and Mr. Tibbins and the Reverend Easton and Mr. Penhallow and Lady Iris and her husband, weep. She bent her face down once to the top of the plaited head and kissed the white parting and said, "My dear." The summer at Westmere came on quiet and warm. The new Duchess walked the lanes of the parish in her plain morning gowns. She took up the parish reader post the Reverend Easton had offered her in November and went round on the Wednesday afternoons to the 4 cottages of the parish poor. Lady Felicity went with her on the warm afternoons of July. The village settled, the household settled. Lady Iris stayed on at the park through the summer and the autumn and made no mention of removing. The harvest came in. Mr. Penhallow's accounts for the season closed in the black. The leaves turned in the Westmere woods through October and were down by the first week of November. The winter came in, the spring of 1820 came in, and by the warm, wet morning of the 15th of June, 1820, Nurse Wenwood was sitting up the small back stairs at 4 in the morning with hot water and a clean apron and a steady, kind hazel eye upon her mistress. A year and 3 months after the wedding, on the warm, pale yellow morning of the 2nd of August, 1820, their first child, Henry Charles Norwood, Marquis of Westmere, was christened at St. Matthew's in Stilling Village by the Reverend Easton, with Lady Felicity, now 7½, carrying the long christening robe of the Norwood family before her sleeping infant brother, and the whole household of Westmere and the whole village of Stilling by the Down in attendance. Tuesday the 27th of October, 1820 came in cold and pale blue over Kent. The South Library at Westmere Park, at 8:30 in the evening, was warm with a small, even fire upon the hearth and a single trimmed lamp upon the writing table. The leaded windows held the cold, pale blue night beyond them, and the small, clear, bright point of the evening, star low above the south wall. The clock upon the South Library mantel went on with its small, even tick. Diana, in warm amber silk, sat in the right-hand wing chair at the fire, with a small green-bound volume open upon her knee. Geoffrey, in his evening dress with one fallen lock across the brow, sat in the chair opposite, with his right hand resting upon the polished arm and his clear, cool, storm-grey-blue eyes very steady upon his wife's face. Between them, with her cheek pressed against her stepmother's shoulder and her small fair hand inside her stepmother's hand, Lady Felicity, now 7½, was asleep. Upstairs in the long nursery under the eaves, the infant Marquis was asleep in Nurse Wenwood's arms, his small dark walnut head against her white kerchief, his small, even breath the only sound in the long room. Diana read on, in her soft, warm, low alto, in the small, even cadence that she had used for the picture books on the South Library sofa 2 Octobers since, and had used for the parish reader cottages every Wednesday afternoon of the summer past. The 8th chapter of the 2nd volume of Persuasion. The passage in which Anne Elliot, at the concert in the Octagon Room at Bath, understands at last that she is still loved. Geoffrey did not interrupt. He watched the warm honey-blonde hair under the trimmed lamp. He watched the small natural beauty mark below the right corner of her lower lip. He watched the sleeping plaited head against her shoulder. And he listened. The clock struck the quarter. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise, and stories that begin with a Tacitus on a stone bench, and stories that begin with a tortoise-shell cat asleep upon an embroidered cushion, and stories that begin with a brush dragging on a cold flagstone, and stories that begin with a letter read aloud in a bath upper room, and stories that begin with a young widow standing at the foot of her late husband's stair, and stories that begin with a single folded sheet handed to a bride at 25 minutes to 10 on the morning of her wedding. And there are, quieter, longer in the watching, of the most patient steadiness in the village eye, stories that begin with 3 watchers at a lich gate on a cold, pale blue Tuesday October morning, when a young woman of 23 in plain dark charcoal travelling grey stepped down from the London mail coach with a single small carpet bag in her right hand and a leather portfolio under her left arm, and walked the long chalk lane to her late aunt's small cottage, and was watched in steady curiosity by a postmaster and a farmer's wife. And 3 days later, in the village shop at 11:30 on the morning of the 16th of October, was named by a widowed duke of 34 who had danced with her twice at his uncle's country ball 6 years and a quarter before her father's bankruptcy and her family's silence. And so it was that Miss Diana Lockyer, who, on the cold, pale blue morning of Tuesday the 13th of October, 1818, had stepped down from the London mail coach at the lich gate of St. Matthew's Parish Church in Stilling by the Down, with only her single small carpet bag in her right hand and her leather portfolio under her left arm, and had been watched in steady curiosity by Mr. Eldridge, the postmaster, and Mr. Jeremiah Trundle, the farmer, and Mrs. Susan Trundle, his wife, and had walked the long chalk lane to her late aunt's small cottage at the foot of the south wall of the Westmere Park, and who, 3 days later, on Friday the 16th of October at 11:30, had been named at the counter of the village shop by the widowed Duke of Westmere, who had danced with her twice at his uncle Lord Hartwell's country ball in the August of 1812, and who, on the warm yellow Wednesday afternoon of the 21st of October, after the dinner in the South Library at Westmere Park, had Lady Felicity climb onto her lap on the South Library sofa to be read the picture book, and who, on the pale, clear Saturday afternoon of the 10th of April, 1819, at 3 o'clock in the parlour of Hallam Cottage, had the Duke kneel upon her worn Turkey rug to ask her, and Lady Felicity scamper in at the kitchen passage to climb into her father's lap and say, "I told you, Papa," by the patient, steady asking of that widowed Duke, and the steady warm want of his 6-year-old daughter, became, on the mild, bright morning of the 1st of May, 1819, at 10 o'clock, at St. Matthew's Parish Church in Stilling by the Down, the 4th Duchess of Westmere.